Ella ji, it's an honor to have you here with us today. I was really looking forward to this session. And you know, when we talk about Bharat Biotech, the first word that comes to our mind is a miracle, a life savior. So what I want to know from you is that how did this idea of setting up Bharat Biotech emerge?
Oh, that takes me back almost 30 years ago since. When I say we, I refer this because I don't want to say I. Krishna and I lived in the United States, and this was way back in the mid-90s that we felt a very strong urge to return back to India. And we had been there for about 15 years and then realized that that was not home for us and we needed to be back in India. And thus came the thought process of bringing innovation, technology, building products from India, because we were not doing that at that point of time, and we still don't match up to the rest of the world in doing so. So this was the vision for us when we wanted to make technologies affordable for the common man, which was also a huge barrier, the cost barriers with products coming from other countries and the technologies being extremely expensive. It was not reachable to the common man. So preventive healthcare and vaccines play a very important role in every country's growth. So we felt that this was the vision and the dream that we had, that we wanted to bring back to India and work on it, because he came from a sciences background. He's a molecular biologist by training, and teaching and academic research, and I had this economics and business and finance as a background to myself, working in the US. So we kind of brought our core competencies together, and we said this is what we can probably try and attempt to do. Back then, yeah, we were startups.
A perfect combination, I would say.
Yeah.
I believe you were there in the United States for about 14 years.
Yeah.
And Krishna ji had also been with you.
Yeah.
So what made you come back to Bharat and serve the country? Because, you know, when you've spent such a long time in the United States, so what was that one factor that, you know, persuaded you that you have to come back to your country and do something for Bharat?
Like I said earlier, you know, these technologies were not being done in our part of the world, leave alone India. The entire developing world did not have platforms, technologies, product building, new molecule development, and affordable healthcare and vaccines and pharmaceuticals. So we felt that this was the need of the hour at that point of time, and it still is. And it's going to be more as we go into the future. So for us, we walked back into India with our green cards, with our permanent residencies in the United States. And a few years later, we would have been ready for our citizenships as well. So that was the time where we felt that, no, this is a call that we need to take at this point of time. And the children were young. Both my children were probably around, they were 12 and 6 or so. And then at that point of time, we felt that we needed to get back home and then build on this, because it takes decades to build this kind of science and academic research and talent and garner resources. And it's long drawn. It's not there's no shortcuts. I just heard the earlier speaker say that as well. There's no shortcuts in life. And so for us, especially product development and processes, and India was not geared up for it as well at that point of time. So we felt that strong urge, the passion to come back to India to serve the country was always there. And that's why I called it Bharat. I coined the name for the company, and I called it Bharat. So that itself, you know, just goes to show what what we felt about how emotionally connected we were to the entire decision-making process, because people kind of did not ridicule us, but looked at us weirdly, you know. They said, "Why are you going back?" So that was a question that we kept answering for quite some time, until we could prove ourselves Yeah.
So, what was your reply to those who asked you, why are you going back to your country? You know, you have established yourself in the United States. Why don't you stay here and do something? What was your reply to them at that point in time?
We again had to tell them this entire story of how we need technology building, because back in the US, we come from the academic research, scientific background. So most of us were, our peers and colleagues and friends were all doctors and physicians and exceptionally intellectual, professionals in teaching and research institutions. For them, they've understood that this was a gap that needs to be addressed in India, and many of them understood that, but then they felt that we were, entrepreneurship. I guess the one word that I can just relate to it is just entrepreneurship. You don't know what it makes you to do, and you can dive deep down into the ocean and, or scale mountains, and that's entrepreneurship to me, in my own little way. Yeah.
The sky is the limit, as they say.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, taking you back to those times, COVID-19, it was one of the most horrific days, horrific years for us, in fact. It spread like an inferno. Length and breadth of the country, people were dying on roads, people were dying in hospitals, in homes. So at that point in time, I'm sure there must be a lot of pressure in providing vaccines, and providing vaccines after the clinical trials, and providing vaccines at a very large stage to people that reach to every household, and not just the elite classes, but to every household, because at that point in time, everybody needed the vaccine. So how did you deal with that situation then?
March 2020 probably changed the way we looked at doing things, because we've been there since way before that, but product development for us was always 10, 15 plus years in terms of establishing clinical data, clinical information, research, regulatory compliances, not only in India, but also to the other international agencies that we would have to demonstrate that kind of information and documentation about how the product is being generated, is being developed. But came the pandemic, and then that just threw us all off gear, as you just said. It was scary. We didn't know what to do. We as a country, it would have been a colossal nightmare for us to have, to think back if we had no vaccine at that point of time. And with the billion population, I'm only talking about the adults. The children, of course, are there, but then even for the billion that we needed as adults, vaccinating 1 billion people in a country, no country probably has done it, and we could demonstrate that in India. This was back in 21, 22, up to 22. But we felt strongly, we had developed platform technologies for viral vaccines, for bacterial vaccines, for recombinant vaccines, proteins, and other molecules. So we had an established technology process with us in terms of how viral vaccines, because this is a virus, though it was known in the sense in the scientific community that there were bits and pieces of these, MERS, we heard about SARS, and all these SARS and MERS, and then we also heard about it was a swine flu vaccine, which was also there in about 2010. I think that was the time frame. So we had also developed a vaccine for swine flu. At that point of time, the strains came from the CDC in Atlanta in the United States, and the government of India had wanted our own vaccine production made ready if it would ever become a epidemic or a pandemic. So we had made the production lots, and we were ready for the country when it needed it. So all this experience that we had in the back in our own product line, we have a rabies vaccine, which is a viral vaccine. We have a rotavirus vaccine, which is a viral vaccine again. So these platform technologies that we had created in the last 25 years when COVID struck us, we had the facilities, we had the infrastructure. By then, we had 3 manufacturing facilities, our headquarters, and of course in Hyderabad, and then we have plants off of Bangalore and in Ankleshwar in Gujarat. So we were able to quickly, it was difficult, but we could quickly adapt them back so that we could deploy them for processing this new virus. Of course, the virus itself came in a couple of cars from Pune to Hyderabad. I have a story to tell about that, but because there was the cargoes were shut and our freight forwarders would not even come close to handling a live virus, so they all would have run away from it. So our own team of scientists and bioprocess, engineers and technicians drove to Pune by road, cutting 3 state borders, and brought the live virus, in their trunks, in the car trunks, and in -70, back into our facilities and entered into our facilities with live viruses.
That's amazing.
Getting into our facilities because we need to grow them. So that was how this amount of confidence that we had that we should at least attempt. See, as a country, we cannot just keep waiting for technologies to come and processes to come from other countries, especially during a pandemic. Every country's first priority would have been their own country, their own citizens, their own people. So, it is only after they complete that they're going to be able to, distribute or let other countries procure their vaccines, and if they have excess in terms of volumes and so on and so forth. So for us as a country this large, that I just said earlier, 1 billion people times 2 is 2 billion doses of vaccines.
Yes.
So, we needed to look inward. We needed to take that step forward to attempt, not knowing whether we would even be successful or not. So it was a tremendous risk challenge, but I think our entire scientific team was very confident about it. I'm not saying this because I'm in front of camera today, but they were not at all hesitant because for them it was just any other virus that they have handled in the past. And so they said we would have to attempt it and see how far we get into making it into a vaccine. Yeah.
I still remember at that point in time, the demand, the surge of the vaccine had just shot the roof. I remember I was back here in Noida. I was working. My father was in Bhutan. So, and then the lockdown happened. So there was no mode of communication. There was lockdown. We couldn't communicate. And there was a huge demand for vaccine. And there was this confusion over, which vaccine should we go by. And then, we had the Prime Minister administer Covaxin. And then is when I still remember my dad called me up and he said, you know what, I've made my mind, we will put Covaxin. Wow. So that was a huge step then. And it just put a stamp, it was India's first indigenous vaccine. And what I want to know from you is that it was not just in India, because when I talk about in other states as well, all over India, in Bhutan as well, there were people who wanted to administer Covaxin, especially after the Prime Minister had. So at that point in time, how challenging and pressurizing was it for you to convince that, there are many vaccines in the market, but Covaxin is the one which is the safest? Because there was a talk about which vaccine should we go by. Is it safe? Is it not safe? How did you deal with that?
All vaccines have to go through a process of development. Our regulator is the Ministry of Health. And every aspect, every single step of the process is demonstrated to them in the form of documentation and all the scientific data. In fact, it starts with lab animals. The small little, guinea pigs and rats have to be. The safety has to be demonstrated. It is a part of international pharmacopoeia, so it's not something that we are, doing this in India. It's internationally followed. These are the guidelines that every single manufacturer or vaccine developer would have to. And in vaccines, the most important thing is safety. Efficacy comes later. It can be 50% efficacious, it can be 60%, it can be 70 or even 90% efficacious. But that just is a secondary factor. But the first thing is safety, safety, and safety. So when we did demonstrate the lab, in the lab animals, it was completely proven to be safe, only with which then we can go to the next stages. We then start doing the clinical trials in humans. Right. And that is again done in medical schools, not in our campus or not in our block of the neighborhood or friends or family. So it goes under a medical institution where doctors and clinicians and research scientists take 1,000 volunteers and then of course they agree to be a volunteer for it. So there's a lot of protocols. And safety was again proved in human beings as well. So in the first sample of 1,000 or so, I don't know the exact numbers. Again, all these are by guidelines and strict regulatory norms. So once safety is proven, then we get the next step to go forward, then show immunogenicity as to whether the vaccine is working or not effectively in a sample population. So that is demonstrated. Then after which was the efficacy trial, which India, for us, we did a number of 26 to 27,000 volunteers had gone through Covaxin efficacy trials in 25 medical institutions across India. And all this is happening at the time of the pandemic, when there was no logistics and there was no, people were afraid of even coming out of their homes. But we had to prove it because we did not want the world to point fingers at us later on saying that, no, they just took some shortcuts and then they brought this out. And then this is not about Bharat Biotech. This is about what India has been able to, has to achieve and also has to demonstrate to the rest of the world. Because scientific and academic research has to be proven by the testing methods and the amount of information that is being generated out of live volunteers, human subjects. These are not again models on simulated in the lab and things like that. Apart from that, we also published it. So Covaxin to this day has 27 internationally published articles in internationally acclaimed peer-reviewed journals from the Lancet to the rest. So we took a lot of pride, I would say. There was a lot of challenges. We had a war room established. Our boardrooms became our war rooms because every group needed one. And also we had social distancing to be in place. So our own little cubbyhole offices were not enough. So all our boardrooms in the organization were converted into war rooms. Every group would be scattered. And then, of course, it was all virtual those days, so that didn't at all bother. And we were working almost literally 24/7, the entire team, not only at Hyderabad, but also in the campuses in Bangalore and in Ankleshwar, because we were manufacturing it in one plant, and then the material would have to be transported to another facility for adding the volumes. And so then the distribution, of course, was handled by the Government of India, because it's the Ministry of Health that controls vaccine distribution. So for us, it was getting to the point of ensuring that the vaccine was absolutely safe and immunogenicity was proven, and efficacy was also demonstrated in 27,000 subjects, which was for the first time in Indian pharmaceutical history that this kind of a trial was ever conducted and done. And we received our emergency use authorization in Jan of 2020, and you just pointed out rightly that the Prime Minister himself taking it on March 1st, 2021, I think, set a huge change in
Change the
terms of
tone,
how the
yes.
perception is. But I think we as a country had 2 vaccines that were available to us. One, of course, ours is completely developed indigenously, so that's why we get this. India's vaccine.
Yes.
We became India's vaccine. And the other vaccine was also available, but in many countries, this option was not there. So we were at least, to that extent, I think India was lucky as a country that we could vaccinate 1 billion of a population, which is not a joke. And we have never done it before. See, that was something that again stood apart. The pandemic taught us a lesson that we needed to gear up for that kind of volumes. And if it was dose 1, dose 2, and then the booster dose, you can imagine it would be 3 billion doses of vaccine, which no other country probably ever would have manufactured but for China, because that's the only other demographic that is close to us.
I would say India is proud to have Bharat Biotech because you saved lives.
Thank you.
You were like God at that point in time, because at that people were confused on what do we do next because people were dying. We had no other option, and then we had this vaccine. If I'm not wrong, Bharat Biotech was founded in 1996. Now it's been 3 decades.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have a long journey. You have stories to tell us.
Yeah.
That long journey that you've covered. Our summit is about women empowerment. What I want to know from you is, we all were a generation wherein women in some senses were sort of confined, or their roles were sorted, or they were compiled to just follow a set of rules, be it an obligation to the family, to maybe her in-laws, to her kids. So how did you manage that work-life balance? Because you have 2 beautiful daughters, and work has always been tiresome. And at that point in time, putting in hours of work 24/7 sometimes, how did you manage that work-life balance, and how challenging was it you as a woman to overcome that?
We have 2 children, and it's a daughter and a son. Okay. So, that apart, right from my childhood, I was taught dignity of labor. So charity begins at home. Always, and I believed in that very strongly, and I also have ensured that my children take to the same on the same note. We have done many things all through schooling and college and everything, all by our own means many a times, though we would have had help. And then later on, when I moved to the United States, again, there, the system is very different. I mean, you just have to be on your toes and on your fingers, and, you just have to be ready to pick up anything and move on. I mean, there's no help. Especially when we were studying and working. I was working full-time. Krishna was in the university, and he was studying full-time, and this was a PhD program. So this was 7 years of, university campus kind of lifestyle, and there was no luxuries at all at that point of time. And then I had 2 kids by then, and I have said this in many of my interviews that having kids is not an excuse not to be working. So I would have to manage the kids at home. I would have to drop one at school and the other at a daycare center. And then I would have to be at work at 8 a.m. myself. And then come back home in the evening at 5 or 6 p.m., bring them along, or maybe they would take the school bus and be back home. So this kind of a lifestyle, I mean, which is good in a way because it teaches you how to balance your time. That is important. Managing time is the most important thing. I think today all of us need to know, need to kind of address it. And we should also be willing to go that extra mile, put in that extra time, because nobody is going to come and lift you up every now and then. I mean, it just may happen once in a while, but not every day. So you need to be responsible. And I did that so that my children would also be able to gear up for that. When we came back to India, the same principle followed in terms of how best we allocate our time. We knew priorities, what were the priorities, and quality of time was important rather than quantity of time in front of us. So work, office, and home were on parallel streets, so sometimes it helped me to just check on the kids. Or there were days when the kids came to the office and sat and worked on did their homework on another table which was empty. So that has also happened. This is, multitasking is something which was not difficult for me. Having played multiple roles as a mother, as a wife, spouse, as an employee, and then, of course, as an entrepreneur, I just can't give excuses that I don't have time. Saturdays and Sundays were working days for us as well. The first 10, 15 years of setting up an enterprise or becoming entrepreneurs, and that too back 30 years ago, was, again, not that very easy. So it calls for a lot of strength that you draw from within, and also look at how to prioritize and then address things on that line. So then it just falls into place, and then the children understand that, as well, and it kind of becomes it goes on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, that brings me to my next question. There was this huge controversy over the 90-hour work debate. I want your quick response on that. Do you believe in it? Do you follow it? And if you say a yes, then my next question would be, do you think all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy?
So you want to get me into trouble now for saying this on Republic. I believe in working hard. And yes, I have worked 15, 16 hours a day. It was relevant at that point of time. Ours is completely a process-driven industry. The wet lab is a wet lab. The manufacturing suites are live. They are under HVAC systems, controlled environments, and physical hours sometimes are 8 or 10 hours in the production suites that we run. Nothing is remote controlled, and I cannot ask for the luxury of a work from home for not just me, for my entire organization. So it's that kind of a story that we work around, and we are essential services. So that's why we could work even under the pandemic. All of us in the sector could be working as the first responders did. So it is long working hours sometimes is required when you have a mountain of a challenge in front of you. You just can't back off from it by saying that, no, I don't want to put in that hard work. And if you don't, where do you get the time? How do you compress time? Is only by, adding your own working hours or time or the group, the organization's time together. Otherwise, if I had to develop a vaccine in 10 years, who would take the pandemic vaccine after it was 5 or 7 long years for development? So we needed to fast track everything. We needed to work with our own time zones. We were working with the US time zone as well. So we had a 24-hour clock. There were short breaks. We would take bird naps every now and then, 3, 4, 5 hours, and then go back to work. Then again, maybe go back and rest a little and go back to work again. So, and I had to be in the war room. It was there in my campus and not at home. So all these things sometimes, yes, is required. There's no shortcuts at all, and hard work pays. And for those of you, I would not want to compare. If somebody can say that they just can work 4 hours and 6 hours a day, you're lucky. Be happy and, take it forward. But if someone has to work 10 to 12 hours a day when it is required, we need to be there. We just can't back off. So I think it's important that we understand to differentiate the need of the hour and then pitch in and be there and get it done. You know, if I don't stand in the front, I can't expect my entire team of 4,000 employees and my colleagues and my, all my other stakeholders to be there along with me if I'm not there. So I need that cumulative strength and energy to get to that larger goal that we needed to be ready for.
Ella Ji, it's been an honor to have you here with us. Your journey has been really inspirational
Thank you.
for me and for, I'm sure, a lot of others will be seated
Thank
here,
you.
for the audience, for everybody who's watching us on TV.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Thank you
being
so
here
much.
with us.